Pleasure, as always, to be joined by the brewmaster and co-founder of Sawdust City Brewing Company, Sam Corbeil, for our Friday happy hour tastings. Today, Sam, we are tasting something that is a Spring Saison. It doesn't feel like spring right now. This might not be the perfect day across much of Ontario because it is raining specifically in a lot of the Southwest where you and I are based. But this is something that people are going to want to have in the fridge once we get back to the warmer weather. I think it's fair to say.
Well, this will be the typical Ontario second spring, which I think we're all used to now. There's the false spring and then the second spring. So that's why we release a lot of this, because you'll get it the first time and you want it the second time.
Yeah, that's fair. It goes in waves with the weather, maybe. That's when you want to get this out.
Yes.
But as we crack this bad boy, and again, as always, I love showing the can art because I love everything you guys do with the design. Oh, it's actually going to go weird because I have a green screen. But there you go. There's no way of knowing. Spring Saison with the rainbow, and it's got the unicorn on the front as well. I have to admit, I've only had one of these so far since we began the partnership with Canadian Football Perspective. And it was actually a funny drinking experience because I've had saisons before, but I don't know the history, the background, the etymology, whatever you want to call it. I just know that I've enjoyed drinking them in the past. I think a lot of people have that similar sentiment where they think to themselves like, oh yeah, I've seen that, or I had one time, or I tried a random one from the LCBO and I enjoyed it. For me, I tried this one the night of the NFL draft, which anybody who's a football fan watching this will know the NFL draft is a comedically long event. It's 32 draft picks that the NFL somehow is able to drag out over a period of about 4 hours. Like I don't understand how they do it. But this year for the NFL draft, I said to myself, I want to have a beer to watch the draft. And I'm thinking I'm going to crack one and, it's going to be like a little Norway and it's going to last me through pick number 3 or pick number 4. This year, Sam, I cracked a Spring Saison here. There's no way of knowing from you guys at Sawdust. And I started to drink it at the first pick, and I didn't finish it until about pick 28 of 32. It was about 3.5 hours in, and it wasn't because I was hammered. It wasn't because I didn't enjoy it. I loved it. It was just funny that I was enjoying sipping it, watching television, watching the NFL draft so much that at the end of the first round, as things were winding down, I took my final sip and I looked at my fiance and I said, I just took 3 hours to drink a beer and I don't know why. So explain to me why, because that felt like that was a very unique Saison experience.
Well, although it is a very drinkable beer, it's 7.7%, so it's probably wise to take your time on it. Saisons are they're brewed for the season. That's what the word means, and typically it was brewed in Wallonia or the border of France and Belgium. It was a beer that was brewed for the workers that were working the fields. It was brewed with the stuff that was on hand. It was very rustic. It was very farmhouse. And so the history is kind of muddled in that, maybe back in the day they were very, very light. And then somehow at the turn of the century, like in the early 1900s, it sort of settled on this 6%, which is the template for the style now is Saison du Pont, which everyone kind of looks at as like this, is very highly regarded beer, and it's one of my favorites. And sort of that became sort of the template, and that 6% is sort of where it lives. So anywhere like this is very high, but the thing is, it's a very dry beer as well. So
Yeah.
A lot of it, the ingredients are almost the same as a pilsner. It's just fermented with a different yeast, and the yeast that we use really dries it out. This one actually finished very close to zero, which is crazy. Like it got down to as close to zero as you can get, which is the gravity of water, which means it should feel very light, but it doesn't at all. It's actually got body and flavor and a ton going on. We add lemon verbena and grains of paradise, which is also called alligator pepper. It's a very spicy pepper. So you get a lot of like that lemon, very aromatic.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the thing that I enjoyed the most, I think, about it when I had the first time, and again, experiencing it now, is that there is so much going on. And I know that you can say that about a lot of your guys' beers, but and craft beer in general, but this is, to me, you look at it and the color doesn't necessarily speak to the initial taste, and the taste doesn't necessarily speak to the aromatic sense that you get. In the set, it's like everything's kind of disconnected, but it all forms this one really fun drinking experience. And it's, I think that's why I enjoy this style in general, is because, like you say, it does feel like it's kind of the higher end. We were joking earlier about kind of a grass cutting beer and wanting to have something in a previous one of
Yeah.
these interviews about just you want to be able to drink it. Which beer were we talking about, by the way? Was it Little Norway that we were
It
bouncing
was either
around?
Little Norway or Dad.
Yeah, it might have been Dad. I think that we mentioned that as well, but which is part of the Lager series. If you'd like to go back here on the Sawdust City tastings, we've got all four of them there for you. But to me, this feels the most honestly like a really hot day, finishing work, coming home and having a burger and a beer, and you can just sit there and sip and enjoy like I did. Like again, it's for me, it wasn't really the percentage that made me want to sip and relax and enjoy this. It was almost like on the palate, on the tongue, it made me want to drink it slowly to enjoy it, and not because it was super heavy like the Bach or some of the other things that we've talked about previously. It was just, it was a really enjoyable drinking experience. I don't really know how else to describe it than to say like it was just, it made sense to my sensibilities to just want to not rush through it, because it kind of invites you with all these different factors to try and nitpick and find out what are you actually getting, because it almost feels like every sip or every smell gives you something a little bit different.
It's definitely very layered, and it's honestly one of my favorite beers that we make, and we've been making it for a number of years now. It's one of the it was the first beer that we regularly can condition, so it's a lot more effervescent. Very so it's highly carbonated, which will like carbonation helps you drink more, but it also when it's heavy carbonation, you sort of slow down because you can get a little bloated. So you take a little bit of time. But can condition means that we actually add fresh yeast to it and allow it to carbonate naturally in the can. And so this was actually packaged way back in January, but we didn't release it till the first day of spring. So it
Wow.
took 2 months, almost 3 months before we released it. We let it condition, carbonate, and then we put it in the fridge for a bit. It still tastes super fresh. This beer will last for a while. I have multiple years of this in my fridge where I save them because it is one of my favorite beers because it's from a time for me that there's a lot of history to myself tied to this beer. There's no way of knowing is a line from a song that I used to listen to when I was in university. It actually
Ah,
the song's called "The First Day of Spring," so I always wanted to release this on the first day of spring because it was my
nice.
favorite day of the year. It's a Canadian band called the Gandharvas out of London, Ontario. Not a huge band, but when I did first release it, I reached out to them and they got back and we had a back and forth and like my teenage me was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, I'm talking to them. But it was it brings back these memories and I actually this style is something that I've always wanted to make and it's we take a lot of pride in these. It looks simplistic, but we put a lot of effort and craft behind this. It's basically this beer didn't take it was packaged in January, but we brewed it way back at the end of November. So it took almost 5, 6 months to get to the point where we were selling it. And it's important that we sort of tell that story. We put the can condition stuff on the side of the can. There's all this information. Uh, but in the end, it's still also supposed to be fun and
Yeah.
inviting. The rainbow and the unicorn and just that feeling of spring being light and breezy and finally winter has lifted and you can feel it's okay to go outside and it's feel like optimism and openness.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You get that. And I have to say too, like my ideal craft beer, as you talked about crafting this stuff, is something that seems very rudimentary on the front end, but is anything but when you actually crack the can and enjoy it. Like that's, I think, what, because there's so many generic beers and mass produced beers where you know what it is, you know what you're getting, you crack it, you get the thing that you know what you're getting. And it's like, if that's what you're in for, cool. That's not me. That's not a lot of other people. I love the idea of every single one of these looking at it and going, okay, I'm going to find out what this is. And then it takes you on that journey. And this one certainly does that. But I wanted to ask you as well, because you said you always wanted to do this style. What was your first exposure to a saison? Not necessarily, yourself having a drink or whatnot, but your first real true interest in it where you realized I want to do something with this style at some point.
Well, it was actually being in Belgium and trying it there. Belgian beers have always been sort of like this white whale for me. It's always been important to me. Like there's a rich history there, and I've always regarded them even before I got into beer as like this sort of, oh man, that's the upper echelon right there.
Right.
That's the Hall of Fame. And then going to Belgium and doing some beer tours and then coming back, and there was a book that I read when I first came back that my wife bought me when I got back from brewing school called The Brewmaster's Table by Garrett Oliver, and there's a lot of information on there on saisons and pairing food with beer, and he romanticizes it to such a degree that I had built it up in my head that it was like this thing that I wanted to do. And trying the beers that the LCBO has to offer, they're there. And like, honest to God, if you can get them at the LCBO, do it. We have at our fingertips some very great deals that you can't get anywhere else in the world for these particular Belgian beers. So if you have a chance and you see some there, pick them up. Saison Dupont, maybe Saint Friand has a saison right now, but they come up every once in a while. Just take a chance on it. You'll see the complexity in these they look like simple beers, and in effect they kind of are a simple beer, but there's so much going on, and they
Yeah.
offer so much. Like it's a lawnmower beer, but it's also a enjoying with food beer. For me, this is the beer every right when spring comes in, I dust off the barbecue with the last bit of snow.
Yeah.
I always have this with my first barbecue of the year, sitting over my back deck, like surveying the last little bits of angry snow that are sticking around, hoping that it'll all be gone. And then it's sort of like this rite of passage for spring to come. And it's, I to me, it's just one of the ones that I'm proud of a lot, very like into.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good to have traditions like that too. I think a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, when you get towards the snow coming, you have traditions, like whether or not that's you're having to shut down the pool or you're having to wrap up the deck chairs or things like that. And it's some people have a beer for that stuff where it's like, you salute the deck chairs and you say, farewell, my friends, I'll see you when times are better. And then a lot of people have other things like that where the spring does come. And yeah, it absolutely feels different. It's always amazing to me, that sense of renewal. And I think when I was in university, I felt that because moving day was always May 1st. And it always seemed like we would go through the rain and the cold wind and whatnot of March into April. And by the time you got to May, you'd start to hear those first birds chirping. And you'd start to get that sense. And that was always helpful for me because it's like, well, I'm moving houses or I'm moving in with new people. And at the same time, it's getting warmer. But then you move on past university and you realize, no, that wasn't a university thing. That wasn't a moving houses thing. That was every person that lives in our stupid climate goes through this, because we have no choice but to realize that, yeah, there are going to be some things that are going to be the ups and downs, like we were talking about off the top here, of how the weather has been today across Ontario, rainy and cold and wind chills down below 5 degrees Celsius and all the rest. And so yeah, this is one of those things, I think, that I don't blame you for keeping it around and using it as that sense of renewal, because it makes a lot of sense. But does it change? I wanted to ask you as well. You have multiple years of these cans. Do you always go back to the oldest? How different are the older ones when they've been can conditioned for that long? Like, how does that affect the beer itself?
Well, the beer will, it's a living product. So over time, it does change and develop. The recipe itself has remained relatively the same. There's been tweaks that we make to make it a little bit different. Uh, we have used different strains of yeast. This year, we tried a different one, which was the same. We had a Belgian sort of series going on late last year. So we tried it with this. I really liked how this turned out. We had a bit of an issue with the fermentation, so we added this enzyme that was going to let it dry out. It took it all the way down. And I was afraid it was going to come out watery, like I said, but it's there's so much body there, which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, but it's there. So that's the magic in the science. So I'll take that. But like other years, sometimes over time it'll clear out, and or the flavors will sort of just mellow a bit. But this one, it's still popping after 6 months. I get that big lemon verbena kick. It's right in your face. Um, but it's also got that bubblegummy flavor, because this was actually a Belgian ale yeast as opposed to the saison yeast,
Hmm.
which is typically a little bit more peppery, a little bit more spicy. Uh, I like that bubblegummy sort of juicy fruit aroma flavor that you
Same.
get sometimes.
Same. I'm a huge fan of that. And I didn't connect the dots on it until you said that bubblegum juicy fruit. But like as a kid who grew up crushing copious amounts of juicy fruit gum, probably to the point where I ended up with as many cavities as I did as a young kid. That yeah, it totally gives that off. There's no question about that. So again, there's no way of knowing. Spring Saison again 7.7 ABV. If you are interested, you can get it sawdustcitybeer.com. And I hope that people are looking forward to warmer days as we get back to normalcy, and you can get it in-house at the saloon as well. As Sawdust City is excited to start opening up. Of course, everything is starting to become a little bit more clear here as vaccinations are going. I got my first this week, which I was super excited about. It was awesome. I went to St. Catharines. I stood in a line of 400 people, and I went, God, I'm going to be here for a year. And then I was inside in 5 minutes, and I got it done, and it was painless. So, and I didn't have any symptoms, any of that stuff, which was fantastic. But
it was the craziest, most efficient thing I've everyone
yeah.
to a man that I've heard say, they're in, they're out, no muss, no fuss.
Yep.
Yet the whole rigmarole to get to this point, that was the waiting room. And then you're in and you're out.
It's so true. Yeah. If you put the grand landscape, I would say, of the vaccination process, it's like the creation, the distribution, that was all of us waiting in line. The wait in line doesn't really exist when you go for your vaccine anywhere that I've seen. I mean, maybe we're throwing stones from a glass house and there's been places in high population, high density areas that have been bad, but like I laughed, Sam. I went to a hockey arena in St. Catharines because they said it was the next available opportunity. And I went to the wrong side of the building, and I was in a line of about 200, 300 people. And they said, are you guys here for the 9:10 a.m. appointment? I said, no, 9:20. Everybody around me was 9:20. They said, well, you're on the other side of the building. We're like, ugh. And we're all of privilege, right? Because we're here to get our vaccines and they're available, yet we're still not happy because we have to go to the other side of the building. And it struck me as I was walking to the other side of the hockey rink. I'm like, man, we are assholes for being upset about this. I'm like, we have vaccines available. Exactly. I'm like, I have to walk to the other side. I'm like, there are people around the planet right now that are not having to go, to the great extents of walking to the other side of a hockey rink. No, there are people that have it way worse than we do. So I was very happy to get my first dose. I get my second, I think September 16th, something like that. But in terms of the reason I bring this all up for you guys, are you starting to get a sense? Are you starting to get an image here of what going back to being open and being able to have people in house and events and things of that nature is at least starting to look like it? It might be an unfair question because I know that you can't plan for anything until we have confirmation, but man, there's certainly positive momentum here in the last week or two.
Watching, the way I used to watch the box scores, I'm watching the vaccine count and the numbers every morning. Like, I think this and watching them get better and better. And today was actually the first time we had a couple meetings with the front of house staff talking about what kind of kegs we're going to get ready. And they're already prepping they know it's going to be, so they've kind of given us that June 14th window, but like, they know it's still going to be June 12th. They're going to be like, everything's open.
Yeah.
So they've already prepped everything for that eventuality. The inside, not so much, but definitely the patio, which I think everybody's looking forward to anyways.
Yeah.
Retail has been slowly opening a bit more. We are seeing people, I know they're supposed to be at home, but people have cottages and it's their home away from home. So they're going to be up here regardless. So it's, we are getting ready. And there is a sense of, just like spring, there is a sense of relief coming and this opening up, and maybe this is the real one. This is the we get fooled with false springs all the time. So and we did in February. So maybe this is the second one. This will be the real one. And
yes,
we will be able to, have people in and talk to them. And, I think a lot of it is just also people just communicating with other people and unbagging this year of wait. Mm-hmm. And then once it kind of goes off, there'll be a breathing that I think we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're looking forward to you guys getting people back in house and having some fun. In the meantime, listen to our podcast if you want some promo codes on ways that you can get Sawdust City beer. They got a great variety. If you want to check out any of the beers that we've reviewed, we got a whole bunch of them on our YouTube page here. for you to be able to enjoy as well. Sam, as always, it's great to catch up with you. Thank you for the time, exciting momentum, and thank you for the beer as well. It's wonderful. Again, there's no way of knowing Spring Saison as I sit here in 5 degrees Celsius rain in Hamilton.
Thanks, Marshall. Have a good one, man. Enjoy the
Cheers.
weekend.